Our topic for today is the Cuban Missile Crisis. This event is pretty interesting because it is the closest that the United States and the Soviet Union will get to actually starting a nuclear war with each other. So, just a little bit of background information before you start the activity. A few classes ago, we learned about the arms race and we talked about mutually assured destruction. So, hopefully, those are two terms that you remember. But remember when we talked about the arms race, we talked about the United States and the Soviet Union, building up their access to nuclear weapons, guns, machine guns, ammo, tanks, anything that has to do with war. So both of these countries were preparing to have a nuclear war with each other. So the arms race shows us that the United States and the Soviet Union both have access to nuclear weapons. However, that might seem scary. We talked about mutually assured destruction, which was essentially that principle that if one country attacks another country with nuclear weapons, there would be a counterattack and both countries would end up destroyed. So essentially, it rules out nuclear warfare because both countries would basically be annihilated. So, with the crisis, we have three world leaders who are going to be very important. Hopefully, this guy on the left looks familiar to you. So, John F. Kennedy is going to be the president of the United States during the crisis. This man in the middle is Fidel Castro. He is going to be the communist leader of Cuba. And then this man over here is Khrushchev, and he is the communist leader of the Soviet Union. So Kennedy, Castro, and Khrushchev. So you might be thinking to yourself, ooh, Cuba's pretty close to the United States. Remember how we talked about containment and the domino theory? So we do not want communism to spread. So would we be okay? Would we, the United States, be okay with Cuba being so close to us and being communist? And the answer is no. And we actually try and overthrow Castro and his regime in Cuba, and it fails. So this is known as the Bay of Pigs. This will be important for you to understand a little bit later on. But essentially, what we do is we send money and supplies and help to Cuban exiles, so people who had been thrown out of Cuba because they did not agree with the Communist Party. So we arm them and we try to help them overthrow Castro in Cuba. So it doesn't work out. It's a failure and embarrassment for the United States. And because of this event, this is why it's significant, is that the Soviet Union is actually going to send Cuba missiles, so nuclear weapons, to protect themselves against the United States. So, this picture you can tell from the top was taken in late 1962. The Cold War there's a lot of spying. So what happens is we, the United States, are flying a spy plane over Cuba, and this is what we see. So take a moment to kind of look at the picture, pay attention to these words over here. Essentially what we see are nuclear missiles in Cuba, and these sites would be where maybe the missiles would be built, would be constructed, would be launched. So this freaks us out because if these nuclear weapons were to be launched from Cuba, they would be able to reach every single major city in the United States, and they would be able to destroy all of these major cities in the United States. So the United States at this point is very, 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 very nervous. So the first kind of activity that I want you to do is basically make a stand and take a stance about what the United States should do about the missiles in Cuba. So there is a Canvas assignment for you to type out your answer, but essentially we would have done this in groups if we were in person, but since we are not in person, you'll need to do it individually. Essentially, I need you to pretend that you are an advisor to President Kennedy. So your job is going to be to choose one of the 5 options below and write a paragraph. Give me at least like 4 to 5 sentences, choosing an option and then trying to convince Kennedy that this is the option that the United States should go with. So, in response to those missiles in Cuba, should we do nothing and ignore the missiles? Should we open direct negotiations with Khrushchev? So remember, he is the leader of the Soviet Union at this time, and ask that the missiles be withdrawn? Should we order a blockade of Cuba until the missiles are removed? So a blockade is essentially when we would just take our ships and we would surround Cuba so that nothing can come in or out of Cuba. Should we send a warning to Castro, so again, the communist leader of Cuba, and Khrushchev? If dismantling of the missile sites is not underway within 24 hours, do we order an airstrike against the sites? Or option 5 is order an airstrike against the missile sites with no prior warning. So essentially, your job is going to be to choose the option that you think would make the most sense for the United States, then write a paragraph explaining that to President Kennedy.